Have you ever really stopped to think about the magic of turning on a tap? Clean, safe water just appears on demand anytime you want it. It feels so simple, right? But behind that simple little act is this massive, decades-long plan. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that unseen blueprint. I mean, seriously, how does a sprawling city with millions of people, all its homes, hospitals, and factories, how does it manage to provide a constant, reliable flow of water to every single person? It's honestly one of the greatest and probably most overlooked feats of modern engineering. The secret, it isn't magic. It's just meticulous planning. Water engineers are basically fortune tellers, trying to predict the needs of a city that doesn't even exist yet. If they get it right, the city thrives. But if they get it wrong, well, the consequences are pretty severe. It all begins with a plan. So, to understand this plan, first we have to get our heads around the sheer scale of the challenge. We're talking about quenching the thirst of millions of people every single day. The UN has a definition for safe drinking water, and it's about more than just quality. It's really a three-part promise. The water has to come from a good source, it has to be there when you need it, and, of course, it has to be clean. This definition pretty much sets the gold standard for every water system on the planet. And to meet that standard, engineers build their entire strategy around three fundamental questions. Just think of these as the three pillars holding up a city's whole water supply. And here they are: quantity, quality, and accessibility. First, how much water is the city going to need? Second, what standard of purity does it have to meet? And third, how in the world do we physically get that water to every single home and business? So for the rest of this explainer, we're going to walk through each one of these pillars one by one. So let's start with the first and maybe the trickiest pillar: quantity. This is where the forecasting and the future gazing really kicks into high gear. This is the central puzzle for any water planner. See, they're not building for today, they're building for 20, 30, sometimes even 50 years from now. This forward-looking window is called the design period, and picking the right one is absolutely critical. And this shows you the high-stakes trade-off perfectly. It's this crazy tightrope walk, right? If you underestimate how much the city will grow, the system fails. You get shortages and have to do these incredibly expensive emergency upgrades. But if you overestimate, you've just spent billions on massive pipes and plants that are just sitting there, underused for decades. It's a very, very delicate balance. So to figure out the total demand, planners have to look at where all the water is actually going. And it's not just us at home. Sure, domestic use is the biggest piece of the pie, but you've got industries, businesses, public parks, and even water that's just lost to leaks. It all adds up to a city's total thirst. And for that domestic slice, engineers use this key metric, liters per capita per day, or LPCD. A typical starting point for a home with modern plumbing is about 160 LPCD. Now, to put that in perspective, that's like every single person using about 80 of those big 2-liter soda bottles worth of water every single day. It's a lot. But here's the catch. We don't use that water evenly throughout the day. There's what you could call a water rush hour. Think about it. Everyone wakes up around 7 a.m., they're showering, making coffee, flushing toilets. Demand just skyrockets. Then it drops in the afternoon and then spikes again in the evening when people get home. The system has to be ready for those peaks. So this means that designing a system based on the average daily use would be a complete disaster. The pipes would be totally overwhelmed during those morning and evening rush hours. Planners absolutely have to calculate for the maximum flow the system will ever have to face. So, how do they figure out that peak? Well, it's basically a multiplier effect. They start with the average demand we talked about. Then they multiply it by a daily peak factor. This accounts for, say, the busiest day of the year, like a super hot summer day when everyone's watering their lawns. Then they multiply that number again by an hourly peak factor for the busiest hour of that day. The result is the absolute peak demand, the number the entire system has to be able to handle without breaking a sweat. Okay, so we've figured out how much water we need. Now we're on to pillar 2, quality. What does it actually mean for water to be safe and, good to drink? Well, it's way more than just being free of germs. Good water has to taste pleasant, it has to be free of any harmful stuff, it needs to look clear and colorless, and, this is a big one, it shouldn't be so corrosive that it eats away at the pipes on its journey to your house. It's a whole checklist of chemical, physical, and biological properties.
And what's really interesting is that the treatment challenge depends entirely on the source. If you're pulling water from deep underground, you're mostly worried about minerals like iron and manganese. But if you're using river water, your main concern is bacteria and all the sediment floating around. Each source presents a totally unique puzzle to solve.
All right, we've got the right amount of water and we've made it safe. Now for the final pillar, accessibility. How do we get it from that treatment plant all the way to your faucet? This part is all about the physical journey, that massive hidden network of pipes, pumps, and reservoirs that makes up the whole distribution system. And one of the most critical design factors here is pressure.
Because think about it, if the pressure is too low, the water won't even make it to the top floor of an apartment building. So planners have to guarantee a minimum pressure throughout the entire system. For example, to reliably get water to a 6-story building, you need at least 350 kilopascals of pressure. That's the force that makes sure your shower actually works, no matter where you live in the city.
So when you put it all together, the quantity, the quality, and the accessibility, you start to see the incredible, mind-boggling complexity of it all. And this quote just nails it, really. This whole process is a constant negotiation. It's all about balancing the predicted needs of a future generation against the very real environmental and financial limits that we face right now. So, the next time you turn on your tap, just remember, the water flowing out is the result of a plan that was made long before you probably even lived in your home. And that leaves us with a pretty big question. What blueprints are we drawing up right now for the great cities of the future?